Good evening, everyone. Namaste. As you can see, I've just come in from India. I also attend Think, the creative school, the School of Creative Leadership in Amsterdam. But I'm here to talk about. Can we go to the slide, please? Uh, Super. So before I begin my talk, I'd like to tell you that life and the world is becoming increasingly smaller. I mean, day by day, minute by minute, we just are able to access. So I've just come in from India. I was at Dubai last. I'm going to speak here, and then I'm heading to Zurich. Life is a matter of perspectives. It's very important before you hear and interpret something to understand the perspective right. So as simple a question as 1 plus 1 could be anything. 2, if you ask a mathematician. Two people deeply in love, ask them what's 1 plus 1, they'd say it's 1. Ask somebody in marketing, it could be a world of possibilities. Hey, what would you like it to be, right? Ask a philosopher, he'd say, well, everything is nothing, so 1 plus 1 is 0. So having said that, it's very important that you get the perspective. Briefly, I've been a consultant and a banker, lived in the US and across the world until I had the calling, and then I finally started this. For the longest time, in my life, people kept telling me, you got to think out of the box. Got to think out of the box. Think out of the box. And I was trying to find that box. The problem is there is no box. So what do you think out of? So for most of you students here, you're trying to make a box, then trying to think out of it. And the whole problem is there is no box. So that's the perspective, really. In the US, I worked in banking and all the way from wealth management to consumer banking and in cards. You just keep talking numbers. It's got to make sense. It's got to have numbers. Numbers got to be right. If they're not right, there's something clearly going wrong. And then I headed to business school after a long time in day trading and made lots of money, lost lots of money. And in the second year of business school, this is University of Pennsylvania Wharton School, and our professor in business strategy tells us, in the heat of the battle, you got to disconnect from your emotions. And I thought, I come from India. This has been taught to us from day one, right? I mean, this saying that you see in the second line is karmanya vadika raste ma phaleshu kadachana, which basically means enjoy the deed that you're doing, forget about the results. And here I'm thinking, scratching my head, look, dude, I've spent $200,000 in this MBA. I'm really well connected to the BMW I'm going to buy. So emotionally, I'm definitely there. I'm just failing to make the connection. How do I disconnect? And he says, well, you just do it. I said, I don't have an answer. How do I do it? Because everyone says it, but nobody really tells you how to do it. That's what started my journey, right, back in 2002. And after a lot of reading and traveling around, I found myself in the Himalayas. Because I thought, well, everyone has done it. Whoever's talked about these things, they've finally got to Himalayas, and let me just, go and find out for myself. So I went to this place called Kedarnath, which is one of the most ancient shrines there. And who do I find? A Jewish scholar doing a PhD on Kedarnath, which is a Hindu, sort of shrine. And that got me thinking, because we talked the whole night, and I figured that everyone is actually talking about the same thing, which is peace and equanimity and detachment, which leads to eventual happiness. But you have to figure it out. You just can't take my word for it. Having said that, the biggest learning that I had was when I was doing a consulting assignment in Dubai. And I'm sitting in front of Burj Al Arab, which is the wealthiest of hotels. It's got gold-plated walls and emerald faucets. And the only question that's hitting me at that time, Prince Al Walid, who's the largest shareholder of Citigroup, I mean, what does this guy drink when he's thirsty, and what does he eat when he's hungry? And what did I have? It's water and bread. No matter where you go, no matter what you do, if you're thirsty, no matter how much money you earn, he can't be drinking out of this plain, $2 water bottle. It's got to be gold-plated. It's got to have diamond studs. But then it's eventually still water. That's what is quenching his thirst. So it got me to a point where I realized that, I have to, in order to, be really satisfied, I have to get down to the grassroots. And interestingly enough, I came across this saying from Jim Rogers, which says, in 20 years, farmers will drive Ferraris and investment bankers will till the land. So great, I wasn't the only one. I clearly had one realization which would make sense. And so I found myself in the farmlands of India, tilling land and trying to make sense of it. Because I said, if there's enough land and if you can grow enough crop, no matter how much money you earn, if you still eat bread and if you still drink water, that's what you got to create enough of. And so we create that demand. Now, going back to the numbers, it started to make sense for me because when you start to look at the world, if you look at, from a World Bank study perspective, you just get numbers. But when you actually travel out to the rural areas in Africa, India, or Southeast Asia, you realize that the penetration of most of the products and services that we talk about is almost nil. Just to give you a perspective, every insurance company in the world has set up shop in India. In the past 65 years, they've spent in excess of $10 billion in marketing, had losses of in excess of $1 billion. The total penetration of the market is still less than 4%. If 5 years ago, when I was a banker, had you asked me this question, I would have said, well, we're just not doing enough in marketing. We're not reaching out to the right customers. We're not doing enough in incentivizing the salespeople. So we need to do this. But then guess what? You're beating the fag end of the rope. The realization that hits you is a farmer's land is far more dearer than his life. And that is where you turn things around. Because you're trying to push a product which they don't really need. So it's not that the sales teams are not doing enough. It's that you're not selling the right product and service. In order to understand that product and service, you need to be there. I'll give you another example. All of us think that, Colgate, Close-Up, most of these toothpastes are really made for, dental hygiene. But what are we really selling? We're selling, get whiter teeth, get a better sex life. In Africa recently, in Zimbabwe, I think I read this on Facebook, so I don't really know the authenticity, but clearly there had to be something. A guy has filed a case against Close-Up because he says, I've been using this toothpaste for the past 2 years. I still don't have a girlfriend. So having said that, I realized the biggest potential was really in going out to the rural areas and tapping the value by creating value from there, right? To create a producer's economy rather than a consumer's economy. What you're doing is a $2 product you're selling for 20 cents or 10 cents in Africa or in any other rural area. We realized that that is not the potential. You could actually elevate that market so you could sell the $2 product for $1 or maybe even $2. And it makes sense. It's a win-win-win, right? Making a producer's economy. That's what landed me at HarVa. It stands for, means green. In Hindi, it means color of prosperity. I love the color of prosperity green on my balance sheets. So it's HarVa. And it stands for Harnessing Value of Rural India. We are gradually changing this to Harnessing Value of Rural Areas because it is more globalized. And what I found myself doing is working with the farmers in these rural areas. These are like the armpits of India, where these farmers make around 10 cents a day, right? Which is about 60 kilometers from Gurgaon, which is a millennium city, and people make in excess of $10 an hour, right? That's an average daily labor rate. But when you talk about this, you try to convince these farmers to start doing, alternative farming, maybe cash crop farming, things like lemongrass, things like chamomile. Every fourth advertisement on TV in India and most of the Southeast Asian countries is a deodorant ad. It's not like we didn't know how to live 20 years ago when there were no deodorants, right? There was something else. But then today, that's the need. What's interesting is every deodorant also needs lemongrass, which is what can be grown in these areas. So if these guys have not been farming, we can help them start farming these cash crops. When the land gets more fertile, they actually get to more meaningful farming. But these guys wouldn't be convinced because it's hand-to-mouth survival for them every day. In order to convince them, oops, is that the video coming up? Okay, wait a minute. What I did was went around and I realized in order to convince the farmers, we had to tap into these rural areas, and we started to find out ways of creating a continuous supply of work and value creation. So I got to these areas where I thought, okay, a BPO, a business process outsourcing unit, actually makes sense in rural areas because the labor rate would be cheaper. We could get these guys to get educated on processes, and then they start working for us because it really has to make sense, process-wise. So when we got to these rural areas, these women who were there wanted to work with us. And one of these women approached me and I said, you can't work on these computers because you've only studied till 8th grade and you don't really have any idea of computers. But she said, I know exactly how it works. I know I can do it. Just give me a chance. I said, well, we can give you a chance, but we cannot guarantee what will come out of it. And she asked me one question, and I thought this would, she'd ask me what it is, how it works, looking at a computer. But she asked me, looking at the keyboard, why does the keyboard read QWERTY? In school, I was taught ABCD. That's a brilliant question. I don't have an answer for it. Dumbfounded. After 4 hours of spending time with the computer, she came back with this. Can you play it? No? How do you play it? All right. Anyway, she came back after 4 hours, and she had the whole keyboard memorized. So she actually went QWERTY. What's amazing to me is she'd never seen a computer before. All it took her 4 hours, and she memorized the keyboard. Right? This video is up on the YouTube, so you can look up with my name. You'd find it. It's fairly simple. So I'm thinking, well, big deal. But I can't do it. None of you in this room can do it. I mean, if somebody can, great. But most of the people can't do it. The thing to think about is that it's a process. All it takes for somebody to work on a computer, it doesn't really matter if I'm somebody from outside, whether it's a MacBook or an Apple, Windows PC or whatever it is, because all I need to do is learn the tool to get the job done. So what we did after that, we went out and trained about 500 odd women in these villages. And these are, to give you a sense, these are villages like Afghanistan. I mean, so the average ratio for women, and you can see the women over here in these pictures, they're all veil-clad, predominantly from different sects of the society, and they have never had access to anything to work on. So we trained about 500 of these women in these areas and started to train them on computers. And what we came out with was the first all-women rural BPO in the world in this North Indian state of Haryana. And the average rate of literacy there is less than 50%. Male to female ratio is about 89 to 100 men. But what I talk about here is it wasn't really about women empowerment, because I think I'm far too small to be empowering women. What it means for us is that if you could penetrate these areas and get to the women, you educate the mother, which educates the nation. You educate a nation, it spreads to the whole world. Naturally, tons of problems out there. We have lack of electricity, lack of infrastructure, and I usually talk about this. You can travel to any corner of the world, and you might not get a glass of clean water, but you definitely get a chilled beer. That's the irony, because people who are paying for it are the ones who are getting subsidized, are the ones who actually the government wants as well, because most of the governments get tax money from it. So the infrastructure was the biggest challenge for us, and what we ended up doing was get these people who are running these chiller plants to give us electricity so that we could run the rural BPOs, which then empowered the women and further got into the rural economy. So now what we have is really a place where we train the women for free. We get to, there's something called a HarVa digital hut. So we get internet and electricity in these remote rural villages. We get electricity from these chiller plants and train the women for free. After the women start working, the kids that they have naturally start to come to us because the awareness is created for free. We counsel the students. Most of the students don't really have a clue of what are the universities out there, so they end up coming to us for their counseling services. We place them in universities or in jobs, which gives us incentives. We coach the farmers in efficient farming techniques, like better irrigation techniques and what could they do instead of the existing crops and how to get better prices. Finally, we get into microinsurance, which is linked to the women working in these huts, which then, because they are selling it locally, they're able to sell it better as well. So net, what we have is, you've always heard of, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, you teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. The problem today is that all of us are focusing on teaching people how to fish, which is something called skill development. The only challenge there is, in places like India and Southeast Asia, when you teach somebody how to fish and then send them off to a desert, there's no water, there's no fish. What you need to do is create an ecosystem. Either you teach them a skill which they can use in the desert, or you teach them, or you create a local ecosystem, which is a socio-capitalistic way, by creating a pond, getting water from rainwater harvesting, culturing fish, and then ask them to fish and then buy it back from them. With that, thank you very much.